my grave if it's mine to choose. Feels like there's nothing left for me to lose. I'll dig my grave. How many times I've got to tell you I'm all caught up in bad advice? So many times I've had to hear you say, you know what you gotta do. I used to hang on to words and make my sting if you stung me first, but I passed upon a needing you to understand my views. It gets lonely, but I've learned by now there's more emptiness in the smiles you're forced to wear. I dig my grave if it's not to choose. Feels like there's nothing left for me to lose. I dig my grave. There's that obsession again with everything going to plan. Sometimes I hear the fear in your voice, and then I think of the poisonous words of men.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Diverge Media. It began over 16 months ago as 2 weeks to flatten the curve. It was a seemingly reasonable measure to prevent hospitals from being overrun, but as we learned what we were dealing with in terms of COVID-19. But even this statement in hindsight was not at all reasonable. It was an abandonment of the pandemic policies that had been in place for years. Medical officers and politicians across the country were all too willing to go along with this narrative. It's the same narrative that has caused undue panic and great deals of harm in those that didn't have anything to be panicked about in the first place. Massive amounts of business closures have occurred, and likely many more will occur as businesses accumulate debt in an attempt to ride out the never-ending restrictions from our politicians and health officials. We have watched government officials jail pastors and find churches who have never proven any harm to anyone. We're simply gathering to worship the Creator. More Canadians under the age of 65 have died from lockdowns and restrictions than have died from the virus itself. In addition, 9 in 10 deaths from COVID in Canada had a secondary cause of death listed on the death certificate. We have been told the repeated lie that asymptomatic spread is a pressing issue, although it is a very insignificant contributor to the spread of the virus. This was and is the premise for the ongoing lockdowns and restrictions. You may harm grandma without knowing that you have. Stay home and trust the government. The issue is, long after becoming aware that this virus predominantly affects the old and infirm, our politicians and medical health officers have continued to act like it is the only concern to be had in Canadian society. No cost-benefit analysis has ever been performed by the government to determine if these measures are causing more harm than they are helping Canadians. Coincidentally, The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, reported that full lockdowns didn't work in July of 2020. Many have sounded the alarm about the harm that is being caused from these lockdowns and restrictions, and one of those people who has been consistently sounding the alarm about the harms and lockdowns and restrictions is our guest, independent MPP Randy Hillier. Randy Hillier is the MPP for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, and is the founder of No More Lockdowns, and is a member of the End the Lockdown Caucus. For standing against the government's narrative on COVID-19 and speaking against the overreach, Mr. Hillier has had his name dragged through the mud, but he remains undeterred. He knows that the cost of silence is too high. We reached out to Mr. Hillier after reading the following social media post. Quote, Unlike the media headlines you read every day for 17 months, I take a multitude of calls from many people who are crying, in despair, and don't know how to cope or which way to turn. Their lives are made miserable by lockdowns. People who are threatened with being fired for not being able to wear a mask or hesitant to get the jab. A woman today who has worked for the same employer for 35 years will be fired for not getting the vaccine. Another woman met her grandma for an outside visit at the retirement home, gave her a parting hug and kiss, and now her grandma must be isolated and confined to her room for 14 days. Family doctor won't see his patient because he's not vaccinated and was told to never come back. This is a man who needs knee surgery to walk and a referral to a specialist. A young man who desperately needs help as university classes canceled last year has been out of work and without any social interactions for 16 months in a strange town, just clinging and without much hope. There are a few people who I spoke with today, just a few. Enjoy your evening and glass of wine, all you pro-lockdowners, but know this: you are causing much harm as you enjoy your comforts. These people won't make the headlines, but are far more real than the fear you can spread. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our next guest. It looks like might be having issues here. Actually, I'm looking at this right now. Just a second here, everyone. So I'm just going to go into some things here as we're letting people come in. Mr. Hillier's still connecting and having some issues. So we apologize for that. But let me just go into some of the stats, some of the things we're going to discuss as we're waiting. So if you're following Diverge for the first time, and this is your first introduction to us, we like to hit the stats. We like to hit the facts as much as possible. And so one of the things we wanted to show you was the ACEs pandemic tracker here in Ontario. Okay, so pneumonia, influenza-like illness, general infection, and COVID-19 flagged new hospital admissions. And this is tracking roughly 90+% of the hospitals here in Ontario. And right now we are currently below the historical average a little bit. We're coming below, but you can see throughout we've been below the historical average many, many times. Continuing on, same website, new hospital admissions, 30-day moving average. We are continually below, when we include multiple selections of pneumonia, influenza-like illness, and infection, than the standard historical average. These are not things you will hear about in the media. In addition, we see countries like Sweden and the United Kingdom, Sweden, who took an approach of freedom, personal choice, and responsibility, as doing better than the United Kingdom. COVID deaths per million are lower, and they took the approach of letting people have their freedom and choice. These are fundamentally different than what Canada's approach is. The joke is that the science is different in Ontario. We know that we watched a lot of the country open up as we are frustrated here in Ontario, waiting on leadership. Continuing on here, an article I wrote from Our World in Data. We're going to continue here. Countries that are in top 25 for vaccination, but excluding island nations that are also in the top 25 deaths per 1 million, according to Our World in Data run by Oxford University, is the following. Chile is the 5th most vaccinated country when excluding island nations and ranks number 22 on most deaths per 1 million at 1,805.48 deaths per 1 million. Uruguay is the 4th most vaccinated country and 25th in most deaths. The United States, the 22nd most vaccinated country, is 20th in deaths per million. The United Kingdom, 8th most vaccinated country, is 19th in most deaths. Spain is the 14th most vaccinated country and is 24th in terms of most deaths. Italy, 21st in terms of most vaccinations, 15th in terms of most deaths. Now, the interesting part here is when it flips, some of the least vaccinated countries on Earth are also in the lowest 25 per million. This could be due to a variety of reasons, as I discussed in my article, but continuing forward, Burkina Faso is number 8 in terms of lowest amount of vaccination, but number 4 in terms of least amount of, number 8 in terms of lowest deaths, number 4 in terms of lowest vaccination. Benin is number 10 in terms of lowest deaths and is number 5 in terms of lowest vaccination. Nigeria is number 12 in terms of lowest deaths, is number 24. On and on the list goes. These are things that should raise the questions of our elected officials. These are things that should force one to question the narrative they're being fed. But in an era of social media censorship, channels such as myself and others that have on experts and officials that are willing to speak out are silenced and censored. We consistently watch as channels are targeted and struggle, and the truth is a difficult thing to get out. But that's why it's so important to have people on like Randy Hillier, who is willing to speak that truth despite all of the attacks on him. He has stood up to this time and time again, and I truly mean this when I say I respect this man immensely. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Randy Hillier. Well, how are you, Mr. Hillier?
Good evening, Greg, and sorry for the technical difficulties that I was experiencing. To all the audience, it was not Greg or Diverge Media's problems, but this old geezer in Lanark who has some troubles with technology from time to time. So, and I do want to say thanks to everybody who's joining in and listening in tonight. And also thank you, Greg, and all the wonderful work that you at Diverge and Diverge Media has been undertaking and bringing light to the problems of the last 16, now 17 months.
I appreciate that. And thank you again. I've said it, but you know, your name's been dragged through the mud immensely for the positions you've taken. And you did it when it wasn't convenient to take those positions. And I feel like that tide might be starting to change, where it's maybe a more popular position to stand against these things, but you've been standing against them from the very get-go.
Well, clearly there are more people speaking out, Greg, and thankfully so. But we know that what has been the problem has been the ridicule, the scorn, the marginalization, the absolute oppressive and suffocating and relentless attack upon people who have a different view and who are willing to stand up and show that there is a different set of data or the same set of data that you can draw a different conclusion from. And you know, so many people are unwilling, and I appreciate this and I understand the hardship, but we have not been living in a free society for at least 17 months. People are not free to speak out without significant and costly burdens to shoulder for having that freedom to speak out. So it's hard to say that we are living in a free country anymore, not just because of our lack of mobility or the closure of our businesses or the inability to attend worship. You know, we're just not free to have an opinion, and we're not free to express it without considerable and costly harms that come with it. But it must be done. There's no question about that.
Well, absolutely needs to be done because I think people have been living in quite the bubble. We've talked about this before. I know you've talked about it, but so many people are encapsulated in comfort. So sorry, Randy Hillier's having a little bit of issue, but so many people are encapsulated in comfort and they're not experiencing the same effects of these lockdowns and restrictions as we are. They're not experiencing the same pain as people. I find it ironic, but I'll use this as an example. Ryan Immigrant is somebody who does the modeling on the Ontario or for the Ontario Science Table, and the one day he took a picture by the pool, and I just thought to myself, like, are you tweeting by the pool as you're telling people to be locked down and restricted? Are you doing, like, the disconnect from people that are advising these issues and the people that are affected by them is immense, and it's just stunning. So just a little heads up here. It looks like Mr. Hillier is having some troubles technically, so I'm just going to keep going with the show here until he comes back in. I apologize. I joked with Mr. Hillier that, you know, when you live in a nice area like that, that's usually one of the downsides, is that the internet connection isn't always the greatest. We ran a sound check earlier. We didn't have any issues, so wasn't sure that that was going to be an issue. So I apologize. But continuing on here, I mean, the disconnect of how some people are affected is immense, and we need to recognize that. So we're going to go into some stories hopefully later. But as we look at some of the data here, we pulled this up. But again, this is the same set of data. You've probably seen articles that have demonized Sweden's approach, but the UK is locked down multiple times. And when we look at this, I mean, it's obviously two things come to mind. It's seasonal. You can see peak and law. And also that Sweden is doing better. They didn't take away freedom, and they're doing better. This narrative of, you know, we need these restrictions or it's going to go to heck in a handbasket it's just nonsense. Now, obviously, when you lock down for the course of an entire year and a bit, and people are isolating themselves and not interacting and getting those social interactions, the immune system is going to drop. You add in stress and anxiety, and it's even more of an issue. And then we factor all that in, and you wonder why people are getting sick now. My guess would be these are a lot of the issues that are actually caused by the same restrictions and lockdowns, but they're going to keep pointing to COVID. So we keep on going here. I mean, it's not like these things are new. So I want to add this here. Overrun hospitals, even if they were overrun for a small period of time due to COVID, that's nothing new here in Canada. Surgeries postponed due to severe flu cases overwhelming the Toronto ICU, posted February 13th, 2018. And they were canceling surgeries in 2018 because of the flu. I've reported on this in other articles, but there's some beds that were just, according to most recent flu figures, 33,000 confirmed cases, almost 49% are 65 or older. More than 3,100 have been hospitalized, resulting in 285 ICU admissions and deaths. And so they were canceling surgeries in 2018. And there were some hospitals that are running. CBC did a piece before this all kicked off, I believe it was January 2019. That was research into all of these different hospitals. And what they found was a lot of these hospitals are running over 100% capacity for all the time, just all the time. Some are running peak capacity of 120, 130 plus percent. And we know that that's been a reoccurring issue. Now, one of the things you can check out on our YouTube channel, our Lockdown Canada trailer, Christine Elliott early on during all of this was asked about this. Why are we going to invest in more staffing? Because we don't even have enough staff currently to staff the ICU beds, to staff the acute care that we currently have. We don't even have the staff to staff the beds right now. And her response at the time was that that wasn't a priority. This was the beginning of the pandemic. I believe it was March 2020. That's not our priority right now. Our priority is ventilators. The skew is off. I don't understand. Again, we've known about this issue for a long time. It's a decades old issue. And then there's your health minister saying, you know, that's not a priority right now for staffing during a pandemic. We're more focused on the ventilators, which we now know are probably not the best approach, or were not the best approach to dealing with COVID. Coming back here, we see Sick Kids Hospital. Among 2,206 participants, the researchers found a strong association between time spent online learning and depression and anxiety in school-age children, 6 to 18 years old. The more time students spent online learning, the more symptoms of depression and anxiety they experienced. Before the pandemic, 58% of the 1,261 surveyed participated in school events as their extracurriculars and activities known to boost physical and mental health. But during the pandemic, only 20% participated in sports and 16% in extracurriculars. Furthermore, losing in-school services such as healthy eating programs, counseling, and learning reports resulted in worse mental health outcomes for children. Continuing on, of the harms of lockdowns, again, I apologize, Mr. Hillier is just having some technical issues. But lockdowns killed more Canadians under 65 than COVID-19, Stats Canada. In a report, the provisional death counts and excess mortality, the government agency reviewed the number of deaths between January 2020 to April 2021 and concluded that 5,535 Canadians under the age of 65 died because of indirect consequences due to the pandemic. Over the same period, only 1,380 Canadians in the same age group died because of COVID itself. So we're seeing lots more people die as a result of these restrictions under 65. We've long advocated here at Diverge Media for focused protection, and this is one of the reasons why. Sorry there, Mr. Hillier. Welcome back.
Sorry,
I'm trying to hold down the fort. I'm trying to hold down the fort the best I can.
Thank you very much. But listen, what you were saying, Greg, and what we all know is true, is that there's an untold story about COVID. An untold story that nobody in politics, nobody in public health, nobody in our bureaucracy are willing to admit to or to allow a conversation about. And that's, you were recapping a bunch of these things, and that was really the essence of what started that Twitter last Thursday night, and why you contacted with me, is, for 17 months, day in and day out, I hear from my constituents about the anger, the despair, the anguish, the depression, the hardship that they're experiencing. And I've been in elected office for 14 years now, and never in all those 14 years have I ever witnessed that level of despair and worry, and the number of constituents who are calling me up crying and sobbing because they've exhausted all other options and avenues, and there's nowhere else to turn to. And when I've conveyed this in the past, Greg, to other people in the media and other elected representatives that were my former colleagues, people that I used to caucus with, and with bureaucrats, the most you can get from any of these people is a shrug of the shoulders, and it's COVID, and we just have to be accepting of harm to our society in order to deal with COVID, and that's just not true, and it's become. I've said this in the past, and I think it's even more indicative today. COVID has become the greatest excuse for mediocrity in our country, the greatest excuse to do nothing for one another or do anything for anyone. This is focused everybody's attention onto themselves and only themselves. And and we've also created a whole level of animosity towards anyone who is willing to talk about these hardships that people are experiencing. And I guess last Thursday, I just said, enough is enough. People have to be aware. We have to confront our public health officials. We have to confront the media. We have to confront our elected officials. But even more importantly, we have to confront all those others in our society who don't give a tinker's damn about the harm that they are causing other people, their friends, their family members, their neighbors, their community. That was just a snapshot of a single day in my life. And, and I've got a good life. I'm not hurting. I'm not in jeopardy of losing my house. I'm not in jeopardy of losing my home. I'm not in jeopardy of losing my job and my paycheck. So, but so many people are. I'm not in jeopardy of not getting medical access to needed medical attention. I don't have young children anymore who, as I hear so often, come home or did come home when school was operational, terrified and having nightmares of harming their brothers and sisters or their fathers and mothers. And, like, what the hell, society? We're causing hurt to so many people, and unnecessarily so. And I hear from people that, and who will be sitting back, drinking a glass of wine in the evening and thinking life is pretty good because they don't have to commute into work anymore. They are still collecting their paycheck, their government paycheck or their pension, and they've never missed a beat. And how can you be so selfish and disregard the harms of so many others? I just don't. I don't get it at all, and I won't ever accept it.
I think it's easy to ignore the suffering of others, when you're in silk sheets. It's kind of the reality. There's been two different realities for people. And a lot of the people that are advocating for this, it's been a staycation. They've had a better life in the last 16, 17 months than they ever did. Like you said, they're able to stay home and work, and it's almost being promoted. So there's a tiered happening of the breakdown here. And some people are immensely affected and hurt by it a lot, myself included. I have 4 young kids. And others are, this is the best their life's ever been. And they're not going to say that, but it's the truth.
Yeah. Well, but there's also this willingness, this desire by so many people just to refuse to accept that anybody could have been harmed, or that this is anything more than just a minor inconvenience.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, when you lose your livelihood, that's not a minor inconvenience. When you lose your home, when you lose a young son or daughter to suicide, these are not minor inconveniences. When you can't get an organ transplant or a necessary knee surgery so that you can walk, or cataract surgery so you can see, this is not minor. But I remember talking to one fellow just a little while ago, and I was asking him because he was a supporter of lockdowns. And he said to me, he said, well, life is good. This is a more appropriate lifestyle. This is a more appropriate environment, because now he was a public sector worker, young man. And he said, now I can get to walk my dog at any time of the day that I choose to. I can go outside. The roads are not too busy. The parks are not too busy. And I can actually enjoy walking my dog. And for that individual, walking his dog in peace was worthwhile to cause a woman who worked for 35 years in a legal firm to call me up sobbing, not knowing what to do because her job was being terminated because she wouldn't take the vaccine. And how can you equate the pleasure of walking a dog whatever pleasure that is, and I've had lots of dogs, um, with with devastating another human being's livelihood. Um, it just,
It blows me away. There's one story off the top of my head. I talked about the accumulation of debt and just hoping that this stops. Like, stop kicking me while I'm down is what business owners are basically pleading the government to do. And there's one I did an article on, and it was a dog run. And I asked them, like, how much debt have you accumulated since all this just to stay open? $150,000, he said. And I said, okay, if everything opened up tomorrow and you did double the business, like, how long would it take? And he said it'd take years to just pay off the debt that they've accumulated. But yet public officials keep pushing forward with this, and the disconnect is immense. Like, to talk about walking your dog, is people are losing their homes, their businesses. The businesses are attached to their mortgage at their home, and you're concerned about what? You're not even at risk or in an at-risk age bracket, but it's a convenient scapegoat for laziness. I like what you said. It's it's mediocrity. It's a scapegoat for mediocrity.
Yeah, yeah. It's just nobody has to do anything anymore, and you're justified in doing nothing and being lazy while you're doing nothing. Um, and there's all kinds of these personal stories, and they run the whole spectrum, Greg. I put out another note about you know about constituents who are taking years now to book a driver's exam for a younger son or daughter who wants to get into the workforce and needs to get their driver's license. And in some areas in my riding, it's now 4 years.
My
So
brother just tried the book, and it was 5 years for him.
yeah, and it's like we're we're putting shackles and chains and actually preventing people from becoming mature, responsible, productive adults in our society. For what? Uh, they're not at risk from any respiratory virus. They're not at risk of any danger of anything. And like so, that's the one of the broad elements of people just not being able to advance and enjoy life, as well as all the specifics. So, like one of the most brutal ones, like what could be more demonstrative of showing one's love for one another than a hug and a kiss from a granddaughter to a grandmother? And for that simple act of human dignity, of compassion, of showing an elderly loved one that you love and care for them, ends up with a powerful, and unusual punishment of then forcing that grandmother to be in isolation for 2 weeks because she accepted a hug, an embrace, and a kiss from the granddaughter. Like, these are like, what words can we use to describe the irrationality of that? Like, people should not ever be punished for showing love and compassion in life.
And the whole premise is based on this asymptomatic spread, which Fauci has admitted is not a big issue. The WHO came out and said is not a big issue. Even I think they said up to 5% maybe. But when in society has it ever made sense to focus on 5% of a problem? Symptomatic people are always the people that drive a pandemic or an epidemic. It's never been asymptomatic people. And this is the fundamental thing that, I think my own personal experience, you've 2 weeks of isolation for hugging a grandma. They don't know how much time they have left. We don't know how much time. None of us know. I could be gone tomorrow. I don't like talking like that. But I remember being at my mother or my wife's grandma's funeral, and the staff there telling us we couldn't congregate together to mourn.
Yeah.
This is the society we've created, and it's not normal. There's nothing normal about that. There's nothing normal about foregoing the grieving process outside where it's already low risk and not being affectionate towards one another. That's fundamentally destroyed part of your humanity, allowing that, because
Well,
that's
I
part of
think,
human, the
yeah.
experience.
No, I think what COVID is teaching us, Greg, and where society is moving with this, is that your life is worthless. Your life is meaningless. Like the grieving process. A funeral is that time when we take to come together to celebrate the wonderful experiences that we lived with someone,
It's a
and
celebration of life.
that's right, and to recognize that person's accomplishments, recognize their love, recognize the quality attributes of that person, and we've told everybody in the last 17 months that those are unimportant, those are meaningless, and that's on the micro scale, and I think there is a similarity, there's a parallel that we can draw with what we've seen happening with the woke left in the destruction of our heritage. Instead of celebrating the great undertakings and great accomplishments of our country, we're doing the same thing. We're ripping out their statues, and we're trying to bring shame upon people that created one of the greatest countries in the world. And that instead of honoring their accomplishments, instead of celebrating their accomplishments, we must tear them down and destroy them. And, and in the process, actually distort and pervert what they did accomplish. We should be proud of our heritage, just as we should be proud of our ancestors, and we should be able to celebrate them as well as celebrate a loved one who has passed on, and not penalize people for loving and for being a loving and compassionate person. But that's, there's a great many other elements that's happening during COVID that we've yet to explore, examine, and evaluate, because government has whipped the mob they whipped people into a hysterical, terrorized, fearful mob. And we're just not allowing anybody to think outside of that terrorized narrative, that fearful narrative. And thankfully, there are some countries, we're seeing some states, some provinces, some countries breaking out of this narrative. We saw Sweden was one that never fell into it, but the UK has now, they haven't come out of it completely, but they're recognizing that the lockdowns, the restrictions don't make any difference in the spread of the virus. We know Alberta has come out and said, well, we're going to treat this like an annual respiratory virus, which it is. And thankfully, it took them 15 months to get there. But at least they recognized that what they were doing was wrong and was causing more harm than good. And we've seen, of course, many of the states have broken that narrative, but it's still in much of Canada, especially Ontario, we are unwilling to to state the obvious.
Thank
I
you.
had this. I had a
Needs,
talk with.
needs to be said. You said unwilling to state the obvious. So I've said before many times, self-censorship is the biggest problem Canada faces.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I was talking to a professor of immunology the other day, and he says, "I can't believe what's happening." And I said, "No, you just don't want to believe the evidence that's in front of you. You don't want to believe that your government could be causing you harm, that could be doing everything wrong, that we have denied people treatment, we have denied people objective, contextualized evidence, we have promoted a narrative that benefits government, that benefits political parties, that benefits big pharma. You don't want to believe that they don't care about you. Well, guess what? I've been in politics for 14 years. I've never yet seen a government that thinks more about the people than they do about their own political future. Wake
In
yourself
politics,
up. Yeah.
got to get elected, right? It's not about doing what's right. It's about getting enough votes to stay in power.
Keep your power, keep your perks, keep your privileges, and But what COVID has shown is just to what extent and how reprehensible governments can actually behave when it's out to save their own skin. But this one of the things about this may be a hard pill for people to swallow, and probably the people listening to this show aren't going to fit into this category. I'm sure they aren't. But our governments in a democracy are a reflection of ourselves. We're the ones who chose them. We're the ones who, the majority of people, the plurality of people, selected these people to be their elected representatives. And I think we can safely say a lot of people didn't give it very much thought when they cast their ballots about what would these people behave like if there was a tragedy, if there was a crisis. And we're getting to learn just how they do behave in a tragedy and a crisis. And it's not good. Not good.
Definitely seen the ugliest parts of humanity over the last 17 months. And that extends so far. I mean, there's a story I covered a while ago. I talked to you about it on the phone. It was a newborn infant, 3 days old. And the mother said, "Don't test my baby. If you need to test somebody, test me. I just gave birth." And while she was speaking with one nurse, the nurse she told not to do that swabbed her baby with a PCR through the nasal passage, and has caused breathing issues that child may deal with for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And this is just one of those stories, and you hear about them every day.
Great. Yeah, these are highly invasive. Like, you take a look. There's very few adults, very few mature people who don't come out of that nasal swab without bleeding noses, without feeling nauseous, without, it's a highly invasive procedure.
Done by not always medical professionals now either.
Well, no, that's true. Or not highly skilled or competent ones. And but a child belongs to the mother and father. That's unless a court has proved otherwise or rendered a verdict otherwise, a child does not belong to the state to do with it as it wishes. The mother and the father created that child. They they are the guardians, and whatever their wishes are must be respected. And I've seen the medical community, again, a broad spectrum. I don't want to paint them all with the same brush. There's many nurses, many doctors that I've dealt with who understand that what we're doing to patients in their um, uh, we that they're treating them with respect. But there are those, a great many as well, who like that disregard a parent's desires, expressed desires, and thinks their own interests trump that of the parent. And that's sort of like with this doctor, with this fellow that I was speaking with, who uh, needed to see his family doctor to get a referral um, for his knee surgery. You cannot see a specialist in Ontario without first getting a referral from your family physician. And this family physician, in a very aggressive manner, certainly an unprofessional manner, refused and told this a long-standing patient. This is not somebody who just walked off the street that he hadn't seen before. Told him to get out of his office and never to come back uh, if he wasn't going to be vaccinated. Like, what the hell is that all about? Like,
First, do no harm, and then get out. I don't care if you need my help, because I hear these stories, Mr. Hillier, and I just think it's conditioning. There's a segment of society. I put out a tweet a few days ago that they're not good people, and this is now an opportunity for terrible behavior to become virtuous from the mob. And I
yeah,
believe when you hear stories like that, that's what it is. It's something so heinous that can now be passed off as virtuous to a certain crowd.
yeah, it's either virtuous but we've certainly given people license to express anger. We've given them a wide berth to demonstrate their animus and vitriol towards people. And we saw that very early on developing when Doug Ford and other government leaders actually went on television and said, if you see a neighbor doing something wrong that isn't social distanced or isn't wearing their mask, you call up the 1-800 rat on your neighbor line. And, like this was, those are hallmarks of totalitarian regimes. This is, in a Judeo Christian society that, and we are a Judeo Christian society that, well, that's what we're founded upon. Um, you know, our one of our commandments is to love thy neighbor, not snitch on and rat on and turn your neighbor in. Uh, and I had constituents calling me and saying, I just saw three young girls walking down the concession road, and they weren't masked and they weren't socially distanced, and I should phone the police on these people. And, and I said, well, maybe they're all living in the same home. Maybe they're cousins, or maybe, I said, did you go and talk to these three young girls? And she said, no, I didn't do that. There's no way they could be in the same house. And I said, we've lost any sense of charitable disposition towards others. Uh, if you can look at something in the most evil, the most harmful, the most uncompassionate way, COVID has said you're okay to do it. You don't. Uh, you no longer have to be a considerate and respectful person anymore in our society. And I don't know how long it will take, if or when we will ever get back to a society that most of us, most of the time, can say is a loving, caring, and prosperous and successful society. I don't know if or when that can ever happen again.
It's it's unbelievable how this is all shaken out, and it's the talk of like vaccine passports, and really more than anything, it's segregated society into it's. I mean, we've isolated people in their homes. They've listened to, I'll call it media manipulation, where it's taking things out of context or only focusing on something. If you cover something 10 times and the other thing once, that's a bias in and of itself. And they've been isolated. And now we have all these people that it's all coming out, but they're pushing a segregation, and society can't go forward like that. And I don't understand the mentality. It can't, again, this to me isn't about a virus, because there's no way we'd be pushing a segregated society like this, where we're trying to divide people up based on their personal choice, if the goal is really to move forward as a country in unison.
Well, so there's a couple of good points there, Greg. So segregation can never be warranted, okay? But even more so in this case, the evidence proves that it is unwarranted.
Absolutely.
So let's just go back a little bit in history. The very first piece of legislation ever tabled and voted on and adopted in Upper Canada, which is now Ontario, was in 1793. That was the very first legislative assembly. The governor, lieutenant governor of the day, John Graves Simcoe, and all the elected members of the assembly passed their very first piece of legislation. And it was an act to end the sale and transport of Negro slaves in Upper Canada. That was the very first thing Upper Canada, our ancestors did. They put us on a path to end segregation. And of course, Canada became the final destination. Ontario became the final destination of freedom for the runaway slaves in the United States. And so here we are today proposing, supporting, and advocating for a segregationist society. We saw the recent poll, 78% of Canadians think it's reasonable, think it's appropriate to deny and prevent people necessary services or access to services based on their vaccination status. Now, if that wasn't abhorrent enough in and of itself, and I think it is, but then let's look at what the data and the evidence shows us. The data and the evidence has clearly shown us that those who are vaccinated are as easily transmit COVID than someone who is unvaccinated. Okay, that's we see the hospitalization rates. People who are vaccinated are still being hospitalized with COVID. We also know that there's a great many people who are vaccinated and are receiving significant, debilitating adverse effects from the vaccine. We have seen Iceland backtrack from the vaccines. We've seen countries, high vaccination countries like Gibraltar and Israel, moving back and saying, we have to go back into lockdown, because even though 80-some% of their population is vaccinated, COVID is out of control still. So it's not a cure. It's not a vaccine, because the very definition of a vaccine is
Prevents transmission.
it prevents illness. It prevents transmission. So these things are not effective. I don't believe they should be called a vaccine, in my own humble opinion, when we're seeing the evidence such as it is. But to allow a fearful mob, and that's what we have in Canada, a fearful mob who think that they can have a return to normalcy, that they can have a semblance of freedom. And all it takes, first it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Then it was the social distancing. And then it was the mask. And now it's the vaccine. And now it's the booster shots for the vaccine. Guys, wake the hell up. Connect up the dots here.
Well, I mean,
You're
there's some
idiots.
uncomfortable conversations around that. It's people don't want to connect the dots. Ontario alone, I was reading the reports recently. I cut in there,
Yeah.
but over 200 reports of myocarditis in Ontario alone, and we know that they're actively kind of trying not to pay attention to these things. And also, it's vastly underreported. It hasn't exactly been a public campaign that says, "Hey, if you experience these symptoms, go talk to your doctor, and you may have." This issue resulting from the vaccination. That's not happening. And so we don't know what the real number of adverse events is.
No, we don't. But we do know that many medical professionals are very hesitant to report adverse events. Again, just as they're hesitant to speak out and feel that their jobs may be in jeopardy or they may be marginalized at work. The same is at play for reporting adverse events. There's no question of that. But there is active suppression as well. I have put a number of posts up on my Facebook page and social media pages about constituents and people close by who are suffering debilitating effects. And nobody in the mainstream media will pick up any of those stories. This is again another part of the untold story that is happening in our province. One that I'll refer people that are listening today is about Kevin Street. 3 days after getting his vaccine, and he wasn't worried about getting the virus. He was 49 years of age, healthy as a horse, doing all kinds of things. But he thought he should do what our government has said was the right thing to do. Don't protect you, you protect others. It's the same sort of garbage nonsense that they said about the mask. So as he said to me, he says, I took one for the team. And 3 days later, he collapsed. And, now 12 weeks later, he still can't walk. He still can't work. His life has been made miserable and uncertain and unknown what is going to, and still public health will not recognize it as an adverse event to the vaccine, and nobody, not one single mainstream media has covered the story of Kevin Street. And I can tell you, Greg,
I'll look that name up. I might be in touch.
There are so many people like Kevin Street. But there's one other little part of that is I've heard from so many, just like the constituents who call me that started that thread. few want to be public about their adverse effects because they don't want other people to shame them and heap scorn and ridicule on them. You know, people don't want to be known that they've been thrown out of their doctor's office. So we've got, as you said, the self-censorship, which is prevalent and suffocating and hurtful. But there's also that the cause or the motivation for that self-censorship is also extremely dangerous. That somebody believes that it is wrong to be truthful in our society, and that's that they will no longer be accepted by their community if they are truthful and honest about what has happened to them. And that's an indictment on ourselves, on our society.
Of one of the things that blows me away about the adverse events reporting is they'll say things like, well, in the general population, there's X amount of people that experience this. Like, yeah, but he didn't have those issues, or she didn't have those issues. And then it's like a week or a few days later, and then they had the issue after experiencing that. So again, I'll put the warning out for the censors here that might want to pull us down off of YouTube and Facebook after this. Obviously, this is opinion interjection, but it's happening all over. And like the self-censorship, I have people all message, they'll put up a little post, because you can do it anonymously on social media, and then I'll contact them, say, hey, I want to tell your story. Hey, and then it just never facilitates into anything, because like you said, it's that self-censorship. People don't want to be mocked by the mob. But I would add to that, the mob, although extremely loud, is really not that many people. Like, it's huge echo chambers with a lot of the people that are pretty nasty on this stuff. It's just echo chambers of the same people again and again.
Yeah. Listen, I can say to you, Greg, and we should say this very clearly to the whole, to the whole audience, because I think it's important. Social media, not a good reflection of society. I can say to you, I've had a great many negative comments and vile, hateful, nasty things said to me through email and through Twitter and Facebook and whatever else. But I've never experienced any of that when walking out in my communities, greeting people. Never, our social media platforms, I'm not sure how to say this, but it's, it's sort of like the Jekyll and Hyde of society. How people act on social media is not how they act in real life. And the people that would say those hateful, angry things and threaten you on social media are meek, timid cowards in real life.
There's a reason that's the outlet, because they're not having that outlet where they're voicing their opinion and frustrations in real life.
Yeah. So, just because you get an angry comment on social media, I've referred to it, as from the old adage as a child growing up, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And, who cares if somebody says, first off, they're using a pseudonym. They're not even brave enough or courageous enough to put their bloody real name to the post. Who the hell knows if it's not just a China bot or some created fictitious pseudonym that is
astroturfing.
Yeah, just that are paid for and meant to stir up garbage and nonsense. And even if at the end of the day they're a real person, they're going to be too cowardly ever to act like that, and rightly so, because everybody knows if somebody acted like that in person, the rest of society would condemn them for that irresponsible, repugnant behavior. So, to everybody who's tuning in tonight, don't ever believe the anger that is on display on social media is ever reflective of your community. And if it is, it's time for you to get the hell out of that community pretty quick.
Absolutely. If that's the attitude in real life, it's time to leave.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything you think that people need to take away from this conversation tonight? Like, you've been at this 17 months. If you mind if I play about a minute and a half, I think people need to understand. There's a minute and a half clip I have dialed up of you from like 34 weeks ago in the House of Commons, and every word you said, I was like, man, that's more true now today than ever. So can I just play that quick, and then we can part with a closing message?
Yeah.
Pull this up here. Is this the one? No. Here we are. COVID facts versus fiction. You were talking with the health minister, Christine Elliott, asking some questions to the speaker, and this was after the first go. I think it's about 65, 70 now, but that was correct at the time in November. So 33 or 34 weeks ago, that was yourself in the House of Commons. And I think those words are just more true today.
Well, the facts yesterday are the facts today. You know,
sorry.
Some of those
I had no audio. I got to do that again. Everybody's so that's brutal. All right, sorry everyone. I'm gonna pop that in real quick.
Okay.
We're back here. Sorry, it's just too good not to share, Mr. Hillier. Oh, there we are. Let's get this. Okay.
A supplementary question. The Premier, I believe the first vaccine the people of Ontario need is an injection of facts and truth about COVID. The truth is that 98% of all deaths in Canada have occurred in long-term care. The truth is 99.5% of infected people will fully recover. The truth is the number of cases is not a measurement of risk or infection. The truth is, in the name of helping, we're harming both the healthy and the vulnerable. The truth is we're passing on a legacy of extraordinary debt to our children and grandchildren. Speaker, the truth is that the fear being created by our Premier with these daily theatrics is doing far more harm than the virus ever could. Speaker, can the Premier please tell the people of Ontario what evidence is he waiting for, and what will ever convince him that his policies are far more dangerous than the virus?
All right. So if that wasn't loud enough, I apologize, but that's as good as it's going to get for everyone.
Well, there's been lots of messages stated in the House over the last 17 months, Greg. And, you know, this is not about truth. But, you know, I stated those facts back then, 35 weeks or so ago. The numbers have changed, but the facts remain. You know, I think that the facts are today 99.5% or 99.8% of the people recover. With COVID. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8% of the people recover. The facts are that 99.8 you know, about 70% of people died in long-term care as of compared to that date. But
And I think we were leading the developed world in that stat by quite a
yeah,
bit, if I'm correct,
yeah,
by 30% more deaths in
yeah.
long-term care than other countries.
And one of the factors as we've seen is our policies and the use of the vaccine is causing younger people to be have a fatal interaction with COVID as well. Um, you know, but we know that the great majority of people, it still remains in Canada today. 96% of the people who have died with COVID are seniors with pre-existing comorbidities. Those are just absolute facts, and it's interesting today as we see government alter. Uh, they're downplaying the numbers of cases and talking more about how the vaccine will limit um, the severity of COVID. That's what they're saying. It's all a bunch of BS, but that's what they're saying. But completely contrary to what their message was 6 months ago, where the message was cases were the important thing, not the severity. They didn't talk about the hospitalizations. Uh, all they wanted to do was scare and terrorize people with these high case numbers. So uh, here's a message for everybody: your governments are lying to you, and they know they're lying to you, and they've been lying since at least April of 2020. That's
Yeah.
when I confronted many of the staff members and had discussions with staff members in the Ford government, and they knew they were lying. Um, and, we saw a cabinet shuffle earlier this summer because I know a great many of the colleagues, well, maybe not a great many, a number of my former colleagues were speaking out against um, these measures. And take a look, go back. I'm not going to mention names, but you can go back and see who was kicked out of cabinet, and you'll be able to piece together who was speaking truth to power, and now see that they're not there. This is how screwed up our democracy has become. Elected representatives no longer, and haven't had for some time, the ability to speak truthfully. Just as we talked earlier, Greg, about people not being able to speak truthfully about the adverse effects or being truthfully about what they're observing and witnessing and experiencing. That's been a long standing tradition in ever since I became elected, and I'm sure long before. Elected representatives are not free to speak without consequences. And unfortunately, most of our elected representatives cower at the consequences instead of facing them.
Let's close out here on this thought, but how does this change from your perspective? Like, what needs to be done inside the house? And then what do people need to be doing to help change this conversation out of, I mean, none of this makes sense. Like, just put on your logical baseball cap for a second. If it's not stopping transmission and it only protects me, and I'm 27, me personally, I had this argument with a friend just the other day on social media. Why would I take it? We don't know any of the long-term efficacy. It could be great. It could be amazing. Like the Trump, it could be amazing, but I don't know. And I'm not really concerned. I've looked at the stats number of times, and I'm not concerned. So what do people like myself do? Obviously, I'm not budging on this. Every study needs a control arm. I volunteer, but that's how I feel. But what do the people do that are sticking up and fighting for this do? Because the government's trying intentionally to make people feel like there is no choice. But I know when the people say that there is a choice and believe that there is a choice, there's always a choice. You know, you're not being forced to live on your knees yet. You know,
Yeah.
if it's willing at this time. The government can say mandates, but there's exemptions. The government can say mandates, but there's court. We're not done. We haven't exhausted all the realms to go down yet. And so we talked a little bit about this on the phone, but people need hope. And there's so many people I get frustrated that have this defeatist attitude and woe is me. And I get it. Life has sucked and it's been hard and we've been inundated with just negative. Personally, I look at it and say, well, then boo-hoo, that's as good as it's going to get. The attitude needs to change. But how do you view all of this? What needs to change from your perspective? And what can Canadians do to truly start changing this narrative?
Well, this might be a bitter pill for people to hear. And it's probably a bitter pill because we don't have confidence in one another. And maybe that's true or not. I'm not so certain. But this is not going to change until people find courage, find resolve, instead of obedience and conformity. You can never find freedom. You can never find normalcy through obedience or conformity or through the end of a needle. That's not where freedom comes from. Freedom is something that is within you and that is innate and important. And if it is not innate, if it's not important, then you're not going to have it. It's as simple as that. You know, our ancestors understood this, and they understood that many had to put their lives on the line to defend freedom, that they would have to go to war, that they would have to go to battle, that they would have to do it in places far distant and overseas. And they knew that they couldn't be injected with freedom, but it was within themselves. And, you know, and that's all it's going to take. But it is the only thing that will actually end this is when people stand up and say, my freedom is more important than my neighbor's view of my conformity. You know, it will, I think there's, you know, there's obviously there's a political, sometimes there's a political hope and political option. And I think we're going to have that. It's a bit of a long shot, Greg, but we're going to see a federal election called imminently. We have one federal party at the moment who is saying no to the mandatory vaccines, that are saying yes to freedom, yes to the rule of law. And if all those people who, and we know the last numbers we saw, there's 6.3 million Canadians who are not vaccinated yet. If they all voted, they would make a difference. If they all voted for a freedom-loving, freedom-promoting candidate. And just to remind your viewers, Justin Trudeau won the last election with 6 million votes. Hey,
Yep.
Think about that for a moment. Think about that. You know, if your freedom is important to you, if it is the most important thing to you, if it's the most important thing for your your children and your grandchildren, then there is an option politically to solve this. But you'll have to get away from your historical political affiliations, your historical brand loyalty, and vote for somebody who will actually stand up and do the job. Otherwise, it's going to be a case of be visible, be vocal, be public, accept that you're going to get a few bruises and bumps along the way. But if you want to have freedom again, you're going to have to step up to the plate and earn it, because there's a great many people who are profiting from this: big pharma, big tech, big government, public health, the hospital associations. A great many people want to keep you controlled, and it's very profitable if they do so, and they want you to be fearful to tell the untold stories that we were speaking about tonight.
It's unbelievable how many untold stories there really is. And to touch on a little bit of what you said, voting your values, my dad used to say to me, I don't really like this party, but I vote for the lesser of the two evils. That's what he used to tell me. And then I added to that when I got older. I said, yeah, but the issue is you still voted in evil.
Yeah.
Why don't you just vote for your values? So I'm not going to endorse any political party. That's not my job as a media outlet. You choose whoever represents your values best, period.
Yeah, I think that's there is no splitting of the vote, Greg. If you choose who you believe is the best man or woman who represents your values, and people, I might put this out because there's a great amount of confusion with people in our electoral system, and I think it has much to do with our proximity to the United States and our the influx of American media in our country. But here in Canada, you don't vote for the Prime Minister unless you happen to be living in Westmount or wherever, or Papineau, whatever Justin Trudeau's riding is. You vote for your elected member. Now, the system is designed, not working this way, but the system is designed that the person you vote for is your elected representative, not the party's representative to you. That person is there and is paid to represent your views and to protect your interests, protect your freedoms. So if the candidate of your preferred color or preferred party is only going to be a parrot and doesn't have a backbone of their own, why are you voting for them? Mm-hmm. Why would you vote for somebody who doesn't have a mind of their own or a voice of their own and can only represent the party instead of you? So those are, the party platforms are important. We know all the major parties in Canada, Liberal, O'Toole and the Conservatives, NDP, Green, they're all supporting a lockdown narrative. They're all supporting a mandatory vaccine narrative. So if you can find one of their members who will actually speak out, but we haven't seen one yet in 17 months, if you could, they might be worthwhile to vote for. But check out the candidates who will actually represent your values, um, and encourage your friends and your colleagues and your family members to do the same, and actually use our electoral system the way it's designed rather than the way it's been corrupted by political parties.
Yeah, and we have an opportunity here with, the rumors of the election writ to be dropped. We have an opportunity to truly vote for our values. I mean, again, if you vote for the lesser of evil, you're still getting evil. Um, and now I think is a critical mass in our society. We're not talking about small things. I'm sorry, I know I'm keeping you a long time here, but we're not talking about small things. We're talking about fundamental changes to society. We're talking about segregating people based on a personal choice, and not even necessarily exemptions on conscientious people that legitimately can't get a vaccination. For an example, the drummer from The Offspring just got kicked out of his band because he had a previous vaccination where he had Guillain-Barré syndrome and he doesn't want to get it. So his doctor advised him, don't get it. And now he can't go on tour with his band. And this is what they're pushing for on an entire society. That doesn't end well. Any study of history will tell you that doesn't end well. And again, I will not self-censor myself any longer. We are going down a dangerous path. I wrote that opinion about a couple of weeks ago, and I drew some parallels heavily throughout history. You can go look for it. Now's the time to speak up. Now's the time to be vocal. Well, you can.
Well, that's what we don't. We learned this a long time ago. And I'll go back to that piece of legislation in 1793, Greg. We don't segregate people. We build inclusive communities where people are welcomed, where people are accommodated, where people get along and love thy neighbor. That's the basis for success in any civilization, in any society. And to to segregate somebody based on color is wrong. Just as it would be to segregate people based on physical height or gender or religion, or whatever. We don't, we also used to segregate people based on intellectual abilities, or the lack of intellectual abilities. And we got over that. We understood that was wrong. We don't segregate people because they have a medical condition or disability where they cannot walk or they're disabled in some fashion. And what we've done is we've incited our society to become ignorant of the benefits of our society. We've incited our society to act more like the mob during the French Revolution, where nobody was safe. Even the inciters eventually found their heads cut off by the
They usually are some of the first to go because they know too much. Quick study of history.
And just like Hitler segregated people based on if they were Jews or gypsies or homosexuals. Stalin segregated people based on if they were the kulaks or the bourgeoisie, or Mao segregated, and the CCP continue to segregate people if they're the Uyghurs or if they're the Falun Gong or the Tibetans. Like the only society that ever segregates people is a totalitarian society. And nobody is safe in a totalitarian society.
No, we have a whole system being built of, you look at communist history, you look at a lot of this ratting on your neighbors, and I'm reading a book right now, and he lived through it, And he goes, you never wanted to keep more than 2 contacts because then too many people would know too many things and it could get you in trouble. And so it just eroded the trust of the society. It marginalized everyone into smaller and smaller groups to the point where it's almost how they keep their power is because it's no one's able to talk to each other and express ideas anymore.
That's exactly how they get power. And last fall, I put out a video called "We Are Living a Lie," and it was based on my conversations with former residents, former citizens of the USSR who emigrated to Canada around 1989, 1990 after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And every one of them was explaining to me the similarities between our country today and the former USSR that they fled from. And nobody was allowed to speak truthfully. Everybody had to tell the lie. The propaganda machine would say, the USSR was a worker's paradise, where they knew that was no paradise. They knew it was a life of hardship and toil and despair. And the USSR would say it's a land of plenty, but when they went to the stores, they could not buy bread or beef, or they got crumbs and rations. And they would promote that they were the land of equality and everybody was equal. Well, they all knew that they were equal in their misery, but there was a few that were more equal than others who lived at the Politburo and had their fancy dock house and fancy resorts in the Crimea. They had their Mercedes Benzes. They all knew that everything that was being told to them was a lie, but they could not say anything for fear of being in the gulag. And if Canadians aren't thoughtful, if they're not courageous, if they don't have the resolve, living a lie will surely find a gulag at the end of the line. That's the only way this plays out. This is not, we've seen this throughout history on a multitude of occasions, and I don't understand why Canadians and many people in the Western world believe that history has ended. Like
The
it
naivety.
hasn't. It's
No, and history doesn't repeat verbatim, but it will echo, it will rhyme. And like you said, you get all these. I've had that experience too. People that went through it, they see the parallels, and there's lots of people that see the parallels, but it's like I'll just say it, you're so damn worried about protecting your own reputation that you won't say the things because I'm gonna get attacked and people are gonna drag. Who gives a damn? If we don't speak truth to power, who's going to? If you see it, call it out. And that's, again, self-censorship again and again and again. But thank you for saying it, because I know for a fact, like you said, there's many, many people that lived through those things and they see the parallels. And if they're seeing them, guess what? I'm going to take their word for it. And I kind of believe them. And I'm going to at least take that information in and take it seriously. I'm not just going to discount it because it destroys my illusion of what I'm living through.
Look, listen, this is the way societies work. There was the Inquisition, a totalitarian authority. It was at that time, it was the Holy Roman Empire in the Catholic Church. And don't believe me, ask Galileo and read the books about Galileo. Anybody who had a dissenting opinion ended up on the rack or burnt at the stake or in prison. Like, that's people in authority, governments in authority, seek naturally to control that. And whether it's the Inquisition, or whether it's the French Revolution, or whether it's Hitler or Stalin or Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, societies go through this. And we're not beyond history. History is still being made, and we're living it today. What we don't know is, will we stand up and fight? Will we stand up and disobey tyranny, or will we accept it? But it's going to be our choice. But anybody who is willing to sacrifice, and sacrifice isn't the right word. Anybody who is willing to, anybody who believes that their reputation is so important that it ends up jeopardizing their children's future and their children's freedom and their grandchildren's freedoms, I would say to you, think twice. Your reputation isn't that bloody important. And get over it, and be a man if you're a dad. And I'll say I'll focus that on men, because in my 17 months, what I have seen, Greg, and this is just as a general statement, obviously there's a lot of exceptions to it, but the most vigorous and the first to speak out against the destruction and the harm and the hurt of these COVID measures were mothers.
Yep.
Without a doubt. They saw the dangers first and were most willing to speak up. So I'll say to all the men out there who may be listening, be a man, speak up, defend your families, defend your children's freedoms.
I could only think when you were saying that, well, don't go promoting toxic masculinity now, Randy.
Well,
but it's true. It's true.
Well, that's a whole other point, but it's irrelevant, and it's a contributing factor, Greg. For many decades now, we have been indoctrinating our children that to be a man, to be masculine, is toxic, right? Yep. And it's played a role. A lot of men don't know how to be men. A lot of young men don't know how to be men because they've been indoctrinated otherwise. And I've heard this from many women, that the women have to wear the pants in the family because the man doesn't know how to pull them up. But there's a lot of different contributing factors. This is not something that is spontaneous and just came out of the blue. We've been eroding and witnessing a decay in our society for a great many decades. In my view, it was inevitable that a crisis of impossible resolutions was bound to happen at some point.
It's people need to put this in perspective, and we'll close out on this thought. I'll leave you with a closing thought as well if you'd like. But Joe Rogan just went viral for this. This idea of freedom and democracy, and it's not that new. Like, it's a young idea, and people have this concept that it's always been like this throughout history, and they take it for granted, and they assume, like you said, that it really can't. We're not repeating history. We're still making history, but people don't view it that way. It's almost like we're beyond the pale. We think we're so much better. This hasn't been an idea that's been that long, couple hundred years of freedom and democracy. Before that, look at human history. It was dictators, tyrants, and kings and monarchs. And that's how societies were ruled. So this is an idea worth fighting for, and you need to be aware that like we can't just let it go by the wayside. This is something that's new, and it's new to humanity, and we will revert back to the old ways if people don't fight for it. I believe it was Jefferson said, "Those who would give up security for or give up liberty for a little bit of security deserve neither."
No, the only place you can freedom is the only way to assure security. It is the only
Yes.
way to assure safety. There's no other way to find it other than through the freedom to make choices based on your own risk assessment, your own risk tolerance, your own whatever it is that you want to evaluate. You know, and it is a relatively new. The idea is not so new,
Yeah.
but us getting there is relatively new. 270 years, give or take. I have to get the calculator out but you know, but it took a long time to get there. Like we can, you know, from the Inquisition, we went through the period of the Renaissance where people were able now to be creative again and to speak. And from the Renaissance, we moved into the period of the Reformation where the absolutism of control of the Catholic Church through the Western world was diminished. And from that Reformation, we moved into the Age of Enlightenment and the first Bill of Rights in 1688 in England, and the Age of Revolution with the American War of Independence. And let's think, you know, Canada didn't just have our government handed to us, our representative government handed to us. We had the rebellions of 1837 to 1839 here. And it was people picked up arms, and whether their arms were pitchforks or muskets, they demanded freedom to make decisions and representative accountable governments. That is the history of humanity. People aren't given freedoms. You assert them and you defend them, but you are never given freedom.
Yep. I think that's a perfect place to end it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mr. Hillier.
It has been a pleasure.
Obviously, you're. Are you still active with No More Lockdowns? Would you like to plug that before you leave?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it might be important in the coming months.
No, for anybody who wants to be involved, who wants to be visible, want to be vocal, want to be public, join up No More Lockdowns. We'd love to have you on board. We've got many local action groups. We've got lawn signs. I don't know if you can see in the background, there is a No More Lockdown sign behind me somewhere, Greg. If you open up the screen, maybe you can see it.
We'll go adjust you.
Right over there on behind me. I have one on my back door. But put them on your front yard, put them in your car window, put them wherever you can, and help encourage your neighbors to also find a voice, to also speak up. You'll be surprised how many are out there that will share your views, but are in their hesitancy to speak out will be greatly diminished if they see one of their neighbors correcting those signs. So,
visibility is a big key. You know, it does make a big difference when people know. I have a few neighbors across the street that I think I want to be friendly with.
Yeah, well, that's right. And we better find a way to be friendly with our neighbors once again, and not just think them as ways to snitch on the authorities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hillier, for joining us. I'm just going to do a quick closing. And
Been a pleasure.
thank you so much. And again, thank you for bringing these important stories to the forefront, for being consistent all this time and standing up early and often, and taking all the brunt of the negativity that comes with that. Thank you.
My pleasure. Talk again soon.
All right. So that was Randy Hillier, independent MPP from Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, joining us to talk about the harms of lockdowns and restrictions. We're very thankful to have him. I just wanted to close out with one thought here from a book I'm reading. And so I'll just leave you with this thought and then we'll close. The Pavlov's dog, if you're familiar with that experiment, that's what he's talking about here. The Pavlovian strategy in public relations has people conditioned more and more to ask themselves, what do other people think? As a result, a common delusion is created. People are incited to think what other people think. And thus, public opinion may mushroom out into a mass prejudice. Expressed in psychoanalytic terms, through daily propagandistic noise backed up by forceful verbal cues, people can more and more be forced to identify with the powerful noisemaker. Big Brother's voice resounds in all the little brothers. We cannot self-censor ourselves any longer. It is time for you to speak up. It's time for you to speak your values. Thank you for joining us. I'm Greg Staley of Diverge Media.